Good afternoon. Please join us in the Design Talks Theater for Women Made, Reflections on Designing While Women, presented by Kering and Phaidon, starting in 3 minutes.
Sorry, I'll just say that we'll start in a few minutes. We're just getting ready. Thank you for being here. I'm actually on this talk, so I just wanted to do the initial welcome and to thank Kering and Phaidon for putting this talk together about women designers. And now I will turn it over to ELISE.
Hi, everyone. My name is ELISE Taylor, and I'm the living writer at Vogue magazine. And I'm so excited to welcome you all here today for Women Made, Reflections on Designing While Women, presented by Kering and Phaidon. For those of you who don't know, Women Made is this wonderful book right up here. It highlights over 200 female makers from over 50 countries from the 1900s to present day. Oh, okay. From the 1900s to present day. And it's actually not just a book, it's actually an initiative. Kering and Phaidon have launched this amazing website, thewomenmade.com, that acts like an online encyclopedia for all these makers, and also will present a undergraduate student studying design with a $25,000 scholarship. So please spread the word on that, because we really want to kind of elevate these makers. So I'm lucky enough to be here today with 3 of the amazing female makers featured in this book. We have MONLING Lee, who is of the design studio Jumbo. We have DINA Nursati, who's of Nur Ceramics. And we have TAMARA PÉREZ of Good Things to People, which is based in Santiago. And so how this is going to work is we're going to have this amazing slideshow right up here. It's going to be a mix of both works from these wonderful women as well as archival works from the book. And we're just going to talk about form, function, and a little bit of feminism. It's going to be a great time, guys. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so Yeah, yeah. So right here we have a work from Zaha Hadid, and the late great Zaha Hadid has really touched a lot of things, both from design to architecture. And so we wanted to start off with her, and I'm going to turn it over to you, WAVA. Can you explain just the legacy of Zaha Hadid and how she shaped our culture?
Sorry. I mean, I think the foremost achievement that anyone would point to is that she's the first woman to win the Pritzker Prize for architecture. You know, I mean, it's been decades and decades of men winning, and then she won, which I think made us all very proud. And then, you know, aside from that, you know, she was just really amazing with sort of embracing the new possibilities of digital design when that was still like quite new, and you know, creating these forms that are just, you know, they have such a presence and so unusual and eye-catching.
Mm-hmm. And Tamara, Zaha Hadid was you've cited as an influence to you. How has she influenced you in your career?
Hi, everybody. Well, when I started study architecture, I feel very interested by women, and Zaha is a super great architect, and I think I love how can she moved the boundaries to create her own way to. I don't know how can I say. Sorry, my English is very bad. I please be patient with me. But it's always the way she create the project or is super interesting for me, and is sorry. I love how she can move to the boundary and move in the different disciplines and create her own projects.
And WAVA, you know, we briefly touched on her architecture, but she also was a fantastic maker of objects as well. Could you tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so Design Miami launched in 2005, and this was a moment in kind of design history, so to speak, when the idea of collectible design kind of came to the foreground. You know, there were definitely examples that trace back to the 1960s in France, but this like first part of the 21st century is when there was just an explosion in this idea of collectible design. And in that case, it often meant like limited edition, you know, creating only 8 or 12 plus 2 AP. And she was really a pioneer in doing that as well. Again, using sort of CAD kind of drawing, which at the time was very new. And so everything was very biomorphic and like kooky, crazy, you know, forms that would be like a bench or a chair. And it was very hot at the time when she started.
Okay, so next, the video we're seeing is a creation process from Tamara and her studio, Good Things to People. And so, Tamara, can you tell me a little bit about what we're seeing here and about this work?
Yes, I will tell you about a little bit of me. I am Tamara from GT2P. We are based in Santiago de Chile, and we are represented by friend Benda, and we are 4 partners. And this project is called Catenary Pottery Printer. With this device, we explain to artisans when we work with us what is parametric design in a simple way. In this case, we don't use computer but this device explains how we create parametric design for do these kind of things. And in that case, in the video, it's possible to another time the video. I don't know his. Wait. No, please. Yes. And that we And the video is play? Don't worry. But I hope you can see the process, the idea with the video. It shows how we create a pieces. In that part, we hang the cloth, and we pour porcelain to the cloth, and we remove the excess to the material with a syringe, and we need to let the pieces dry. And when the pieces is dry, we can remove, peel off the cloth and put in the kiln. And that is when you can take the pieces. And for example, in that pieces, all in advance advantage to use the translucent of material, the porcelain, we create lamps and lights with that technique. And the last one I want to mention of that work is we put a little chunk of volcanic rock for hanging the pieces, and we notice is melted in the same time the porcelain is stronger and is attached in this. And I think the most important one of these pieces now are in the Metropolitan Museum. We are very happy for that. It's part of the collection of the museum.
That's amazing. Okay, so this is a work by Dina. So Dina, tell us what we're seeing here.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dina SATTI, and a lot of my practice is actually about the intangible aspects of art and the artistic process. So I always think of my object being really the tip of the iceberg, and so I'm really curious about the artistic journey and the process of being an artist. And a lot of my background actually is in pre-colonial African history and design. And the first part really was taking an African art history course in college and realizing that objects in societies, in these traditional indigenous cultures, have a very strong symbolism and co-evolve along with the culture. So this is something I think in the West that we have kind of lost or don't really look at sometimes. And when you look back at ceramics, you actually see that it's co-evolved with women also, which is really interesting in this panel that we're talking about, because the first objects that were created out of ceramics were actually for storing grain, and women were producing these. And so a lot of the travels that I do in parts of Africa are all about connecting with women who have upheld these traditions for a long time and learning from them really how these objects are used in ceremonies and what it means to find symbolism in plants. And nature is the original designer. And so when we think of good design, nature is an amazing reference point. And so these pieces are actually inspired by the acacia tree, which is one of the great symbols of Africa. It's a symbol of regeneration. It's also a wood that's used in a lot of traditional ceremonies where I'm from in Sudan. We use these in incense smoke, which also dates back to the time of the pharaohs. So this is kind of how I create pieces. My process really is about going internally, learning a lot about the history, and going on this identity journey for myself, which I think is also part of our global story as people who often are from two different cultures, two different worlds. Also stories of global immigration and reconciling one's personal identity through that.
And Dina, a quote by Virgil Abloh just came to mind when you were talking about your work, where he said, design can be a bridge to the past while having an eye to the future. And I think that's something that really resonates with your work, because you honor these kind of like time-old traditions while infusing your work with kind of a modern sensibility. So tell me how you try to keep your pieces modern while also honoring the traditions of your ancestors.
Absolutely. I actually think some of the greatest design that I've come across is from these ancient traditions. When you look at some of the temples, you look at some of the ritual objects that are used, the eye for design is not something that's mathematical a lot of the time. It's something very intuitive and something that they've kind of built over generations. And you always think of this intergenerational knowledge that's passed down through traditions. And that conversation for me is a conversation of this time and of the past at the same time. And also, a lot of the time, looking back and finding the inspiration in the women of that time. You know, often as a designer, I get the question, who are some of your inspirations? And actually, it's those women who first created those crafts that we're still upholding today. That's my inspiration. Learning from them, learning what their interpersonal relationship is. And any artist in the room probably can agree that your art is your life. And so I'm very curious to learn from these ancient traditions on how, you know, their everyday use of objects, their spirituality, their family structure, their governance, all really is connected to design.
Okay, so we're on to MONLING here. So tell us here, and one thing I have to tell you about MONLING that I love is that she describes her designs as dumb, in a playful way. Of course they're not dumb, but MONLING, tell us what you mean by that as we look at a slide that says Dumb and Dumber.
Actually, the caption for this Dumb and Dumber, it's referencing a different slide, but
okay.
A lot of the same ideas that this idea applies to all of our work. So I'm the co-founder of Jumbo. We're a object and furniture design studio based in New York and DC. My partner, Justin Donnelly, he's over here. So we're both architects. We studied architecture. We worked in the field for, you know, over 10 years. And when we initiated the studio, we really wanted to it's a kind of a reaction against, you know, our experience in architecture. We wanted to create, you know, to make objects that are more immediate, that are more emotionally effective. So really, that just means that we want to make delightful objects that, you know, bring joy in people's lives. And in that way, you know, some of our strategies, we want to reduce formal complexity. We really wanted to, you know, get this maximum emotional effectiveness with the minimum level of complexity so that the objects are legible immediately, they're iconic, and they are understandable, relatable. You know, we bring them home with us, we love them, we nurture them. So this way, you know, that's why we really, you know, we just wanted to distill the form and the idea and the material into the simplest way possible, so that, you know, in you know, lovingly dumb.
And one of my favorite pieces of yours is in this you know, slide, which is this tennis ball looking couch. So tell me about the sports sofa.
Yeah, so this collection, it's our Creature Comfort collection that we released in 2020, just a few months after we were all shut down. And this collection really resulted from our experience during lockdown and, you know, what we found joy and, you know, comforted ourselves with. So the sports sofa is really inspired by, you know, our need to interact with friends and, you know, the joy of athletics. So the sports sofa, of course, we love a pudgy form, and you know, the form, you know, reminded us of a overstuffed boxing glove, and the seaming and the color reminds us of, you know, a tennis ball. So we really just wanted to, you know, bring all of these, you know, comforting associations that, you know, experience that we enjoy during this, you know, pandemic experience into our work.
So here we have an archival piece, and this is by Afrascarpa. And WAVA, I would really like you to go into this piece, because Afrascarpa was part of a husband-wife pair, and she unfortunately did not get as much of fame as her husband, even though they were doing equal work. Can you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, I mean,
their work as a couple, it's actually some of my favorite work. It's 1970s, late 60s, 70s Italian design. It's kind of the golden age of made in Italy, where it was almost like the world kind of woke up to how awesome, design objects from Italy were. And it was really associated not only with quality, but like very sort of sensual style. And this happened all throughout the post-war era, but by the 70s, things were no longer modernist in a sense of being very pared down. I mean, it's still, pared back, but there's little decorative elements that are starting to come back and looking forward to like the postmodern era that was just around the corner. So Afra worked with her husband, Tobia. He's actually son of Carlo Scarpa, which is another very famous Italian designer from the generation before. So she's born in the 30s, graduates architecture school in the 1950s, the same as her husband. They joined forces, opened their own office, but it's just very common at this time that even as husbands and wives were working side by side, the husband gets more of the recognition. Like when there's an award given, it's like given in the husband's name and not given in the duo's name. I mean, this happened a lot with Charles and Ray Eames. A little bit even later, into the postmodern era, you have Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi. Also, he got the Pritzker Prize. She did not, but they worked together. So I find that she's just very symbolic of the just overt sexism of the 20th century, which we are moving past, even though there's still things to accomplish going forward. But you just kind of have to feel for her a little bit.
Yes, and to echo what WAVA said about Ray and Charles Eames, when Ray and Charles Eames submitted their chaise lounge to the MoMA for a design competition and won, she was left off the announcement, even though they split the work. And that was just a really unfortunate part of the time, and that's part of why we have Women Made right here, actually, is to kind of correct that history while also making sure that we never have another Ray Eames, because everyone should be getting credit. Dina, we're back to you. And so tell me about these vessels.
Yeah, so in a lot of my work, I like to identify pieces that really span different cultures and different times. And so this is a grain pounder. Again, going back to what I spoke about grain pounders and grain storage being some of the first ceramic work that we see. Although grain pounders are usually wood, you wouldn't really be able to pound grain in ceramic. And so this is actually a piece that symbolizes kind of the unity of design across traditional cultures. And this is a piece that I created very recently in 2020. And I think also the other aspect is this is a ritual that usually is done between women. Women go back and forth pounding the grain. And one of the things that I'm most inspired by is witnessing a lot of the rituals from my culture growing up, which have this aesthetic sensuality that I think is something a lot of designers talk about design being emotional, and for me it is not only emotional but also very sensual. It really activates the senses, and this is often in my work something that I strive to capture.
I would love you to go a little bit more into that, which is you briefly touched on how your Somali and Sudanese heritage informs your design. So tell me just how that factors into your creation process and how that intersects with your womanhood.
Absolutely. I think gender being a construct, we are existing in a binary structure and a paradigm in which we are conditioned to associate ourselves with our prescribed gender. And so growing up, there were a lot of rituals and a lot of spaces that were predominantly for women. And so I found a femininity and a sensuality in those spaces and the rituals that evolve with them and the objects that are used in those rituals. And so that space and observing the sensuality of the women in that space and the objects that they're using, and often heirloom objects that are being passed down from generation to generation, it gave me an intimate understanding of that feeling of womanhood in the societies. And that informs my work to this day. Most of the rituals that I study, even the craft that I'm studying is a historically female craft. And the women that I work with in the parts of East Africa that I travel to are all women. And so it really is about honoring and understanding those traditions and those lineages.
Okay, Monling, wait, before we go into it, is the slide information correct on this one?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. So tell me about this piece.
Yeah, so this Neotenic collection was our first collection, 2018, that we released, and it consisted of a chair, a table light, a sconce, and there's a larger floor light, not pictured. So, you know, as I mentioned before, we're really interested in, you know, achieving emotionally effective design, you know, how things make us feel. So really this collection, we were doing a lot of reading about the idea of neoteny, the science of neoteny, which is a theory introduced by a zoologist in the 40s about juvenile features and basically how we as humans, when we see these juvenile features such as, you know, larger eyes, enlarged head, chubby cheeks, and pudgy extremities, we, you know, naturally, biologically, you know, have this sort of nurturing affection for these things, for you know, humans or animals, and sometimes these feelings, you know, can be transcribed to inanimate objects. So, you know, we really believe that, you know, in order to this is we, you know, just research into how to create lovable objects by, you know, pursuing some of these ideas. So, as you can see here, we imbued these objects with human and sometimes zoomorphic proportions. The extremities are enlarged, and the members are jumbofied. And we reduce any seams. There's a consistent use of materiality. And really, we just wanted to, we really dematerialize the overall effects so that they make you feel like, you know, it's a child.
Okay, so this is a chair by Greta Jock, and she kind of pioneered Danish mid-century modernism. And so if WAVA, you could kind of weigh in on her legacy and what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, the 20th century did have a lot of women who, I mean, a lot, you know, I don't know how to like quantify, like by far men far overshadowed women in the sort of modernist design era. But she is someone who sort of stood on her own and, you know, contributed works that are considered like icons of design history, and, you know, sort of caring for this very sort of modernist principles of, you know, minimal materials, economy of form, functionalism. But I think that happened to be a little bit more common in Northern Europe than it was in other places by chance. But yeah, she's someone who kind of made it out there on her own.
Okay, Tamara, we're back to you. One of the amazing things about Tamara is one of the materials she uses is remolten lava. So tell us about your use of that very, very unique material.
In that case, that pieces is monolithature is the piece featured in the book, and this is a part of the collection, the Copperhead Museum in New York. And yes, please, the next to see the video.
Is there a video? Okay.
Yes, please. And that we travel around the Chile, found different kind of volcanic rock, and in that case is Osorno, and back to Santiago, and we grind them in different grind sizes. And the idea, we mix it with molasses and paste the material to the stoneware. And for example, in that you can see different kind of texture, rough or soft, and for that we play with the temperature into the kiln, and that is the idea, the remolten. And yes,
fascinating.
Yes.
Okay, we're now back to another archival piece. So this piece is by Mira Nakashima. Could you tell me a little bit about her work, especially her skill in woodworking and her relationship with her father?
Yeah, I mean, Mira's still alive. She's still working in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And as Elise said, her work carries on this tremendous legacy that her father built in the post-war era. He was a Japanese-American man. Mira was born during World War II, and at 6 months, her and her family were imprisoned by the US government with other Japanese Americans, and they were able to get out with friends that were architects, sort of white Anglo architect friends helped them get out, and they built a home in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And he had studied architecture, but he had almost a sort of spiritual idea about trees and nature and making furniture that kind of honored the wood and let the wood speak for itself. There are some pieces by George Nakashima here in the show and are at the top of the market, very blue chip. And so the story goes that she wasn't really interested in doing the work that he did, but she got a lot of pressure and eventually fell in love with it. You know, she apprenticed under him. She learned to do all the things that he can do. And I think, you know, she evolved it a little bit more, like a little more curves, a little more unusual forms than he had. You know, and people love her. Her work is completely collected, but I think it's worth acknowledging that, like, she never got out behind the shadow of her father. You know, and it's sort of a shame because she can do what he can do.
So one thing I do want to ask you is that, especially for the women who were designing in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, you know, gender was something that worked against them, but also women who were not born in European or American countries. So tell me about how kind of Eurocentrism played a role in what designs we know today from women.
Can you ask the question one more time? I just cut out a little bit for me.
Okay, so you know, in Women Made, one of the points they make is that in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, not only was gender working against some designers, but also basically where they lived. So if you were in Europe or you were in America, you had kind of a greater chance of your work really catching on. So, you know, Mira and her father were some of the few people who could break out during that era. So could you kind of comment on how, you know, specifically African, and you guys all weigh in too, African and Asian design has kind of been gatekept just because of you know, where they were located?
I mean, that's a whole dissertation, and it plays into politics and economics and colonialism and on and on and on. But I think if we just keep the conversation within design history itself, you know, the 20th century was dominated by modernism as a theory, right? And that theory, which was created by white men, mostly in Europe, a little bit inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, but a lot of Germans, the whole Bauhaus movement, although there were a lot of women at the Bauhaus. But it was this theory that was very sure of itself, in a sense, and it kind of believed in sort of like universal truths, that if you use modulism and you used economy of form, that somehow you would be able to get more stuff to more people, and that everyone's sort of standard of living would be raised and the world would be a better place. But ultimately, they were kind of imposing this view on the world. I mean, modernism was taken to other countries like India and Brazil, and just and public housing was often made in these sort of modernist idioms, and that turned out to be complete failures. Nobody wanted to live in them, and it was quite awful. So, I mean, I think this sort of universalism, this sort of surety that they like knew what the answers were, played a role in like limiting who participated in the conversation at the time.
And Dina, I would also like to ask you, because you're someone who really, you know, is involved in African design. Have you faced any challenges, you know, trying to champion that kind of form?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think as people of color creating in a Western world, speaking to a lot of my fellow artists, we would often for many years talk about this glass ceiling that we experienced. And a lot of it actually is because, as WAVA was saying, the canon of art in this part of the world really was a continuation of a culture that we were not really a part of. And so I think with the BLM movements and kind of the cultural shift that we've been collectively experiencing, there has been this opening up to new narratives and new perspectives, which is, I think, why we're on stage today. And part of this awareness that I think as a design community, as well as a global community, we're really trying to rectify the wrongs of the past.
Oh, and here we are. So, you know, I love this piece, and I have to ask you because your pieces are, of course, functional, but they also have such beautiful form. So, for you, if you had to pick one, which do you kind of prioritize more, form or function?
You know, I think function gives birth to form. And I think good function very naturally creates good form. And so that's what I would pick. But actually, interesting thing about this piece is it is kind of part of the conversation we just had. One of the things that I'm very fascinated by is the development of culture and how we come about to build the realities that we exist in. And so one of the things that this represents is actually water storage amphoras in Sudan. And so when you go around where my family is from, these are sitting in pairs outside of people's homes, and they keep the water cool in the desert. And they actually have cups on the side for passerbys to just quench their thirst. And that's a completely different way of seeing property, capitalism, and the ownership of water. And that's something in our capitalist system, we really think about the resources as being something that belong to a certain group of people and something that we can capitalize on. But this is a culture where they believe that water, even in the desert, is for everybody. So sometimes design really tells a story that really reflects the belief systems of people.
So this, you know, this art is not on stage with us today, but it is a entry in the Woman Made book. It's called the Savage Sofa. So WAVA, can you tell us about this very amorphous yet beautiful design?
Yeah, I mean, Jay, she's not here, but her work is represented in Design Miami quite often. I think last year, no, it was last year or the year before, she won like Best in Show for this body of work. And I just thought she was interesting to bring up in the women that I'm talking about, the sort of arc of like what it was like in the 1950s and then the 1970s. You know, she's very much right now. She was born in Seoul, but I think she lives in Seattle. I think she lives out west. But she's quite young, and underneath this form is kind of like found discarded plastic objects. So, I mean, I think a generation now, you know, you're very aware of the fact that we live in this throwaway culture. There's all these sort of, you know, cheap design objects that have just been like tossed aside or tried out and have no use anymore. And so she collects them and assembles them in a way to make a functional form, and then she just intricately wraps them in these like leather cords to make this like beautiful object out of what is essentially trash, I guess, underneath. But I mean, clean and fabulous, but you know, just like things that nobody valued anymore, she finds a new value for it, and that just feels sort of the moment, I guess.
So this piece you can actually go visit. It's in the Design District, and it's one of TAMARA's fantastic public art installations. So tell us. I had a coffee and I went on these swings yesterday. So tell us about what we're seeing here.
We are really proud about this project, because we winner of the holiday competition in Design Miami. And our project invites the people to reflect about how our action impact directly to our environment. That is the idea. This project called Conscious Actions, and that is the idea of the project. And I think the most important with the swing is we work with a really good team. With Design Miami and our projects are all built. They are really, really nice, and it was hard because we made everything by WhatsApp and Zoom and built from Chile and here, and it was we made in pandemic, and it was difficult, but I saw the last Monday for first time. And
Oh, really?
yes, really, and it was amazing. And of course, we took many, many photos with my husband. It's my partner too, Guillermo. And yes, it was really, really nice see the people play with interaction with the pieces. It's
Yes.
really, really nice, the swing. Thank you.
It's a design that really brings joy to a lot of people if you can go visit it. You really see people interacting with it.
We are really happy.
So this is another entry from the book. This is Faye Toogood's roly-poly chair. Many of you probably recognize it. It's probably, frankly, one of the most Instagrammable pieces that has boomeranged kind of the internet and kind of become this cult collector's item. So tell me a little bit about the roly-poly chair, WAVA, and Faye Toogood, and what you kind of think her design style is like. And she's still very much creating today, but what her legacy may even be.
Yeah, so I think she was born in the 70s, so she's been working for a while. But I think she's another good kind of representation of what has happened in the 21st century. So she's completely, her own brand, the Toogood brand, and she works across disciplines. I mean, the first time I saw her work, it was actually a performance of all these women dressed in white, and they were moving these design objects around. But she's a fashion designer, she's a furniture designer, she works with galleries here, also Friedman Benda, I believe, yeah. Doing these limited editions, very collectible pieces, but then she also sells works that are more in production. And so she's kind of made a little mini empire from London. And, she just has this sort of art director eye where everything looks just very cool, I guess.
Yes, she specializes in human-like and childlike forms, kind of just like you, MONLING. When I interviewed her about this chair, she said it looks like a baby elephant, and now it is exactly what I see. But one thing Faye said in actually a Q&A with Phaidon, which I think I would love to discuss with you all, which is that she actually doesn't like discussing gender when it comes to her work because she doesn't believe gender is relevant in today's society. So let me ask you guys up here, do you like discussing gender when you come to your work? Do you find it as something that's integral to part of your design? Or are you like Faye where you don't really think it's relevant?
I think echoing Faye, being invited on this panel is, actually gave me an opportunity to think about this question, in the past couple of days, and have to really think hard about how being a woman influenced my own design experience. And I think, with Faye, I agree with her that I don't like to discuss gender politics, but because, I have the luxury to not to. Being, an American, an Asian American, but an American nonetheless, there's a lot more, we have a lot more currency in terms of, representation in the world stage, in the design stage, and that's, really, it's something that, sometimes I take for granted, but that's, yeah, that's, I don't like to talk about it, but I do think that it's because I can afford not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me the answer is a little bit of both. I think that I understand where she's coming from, that we are artists first and foremost, and the artistic experience and journey is a universal one, no matter what your gender is. But at the same time, again, we are living in a society where everything is gendered, and so we can't deny the fact that it influences the way that we create and the way that the audiences process and take in our art.
Yes, it's and if you decide to flip through this book, you can kind of see how the designers back in the day, they were fighting to be recognized, because of their gender, or despite of their gender, where the women today are facing a different set of challenge, where they're fighting not to be boxed in by it. So that's one of the reasons that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying we're getting at the 40.
Okay. So we're gonna go to Q&A in a few minutes, but just to kind of wrap
for
up
our
the
awkward
slideshow.
segue there. Like
no, I got it. We got it.
We got
so
it.
MONLING, this is you, and this is Creatures.
Dumb and Dumber.
This is Dumb and Dumber. Okay, so can you talk to us about the name Dumb and Dumber, because I love that name.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I mentioned in the beginning, we really just wanted to, to get to the essence of what's the most simple form that can, get us feeling good. And so this collection, we're also interested in capturing a sense of kinetic motion, a sense of motion on these objects. So we, used a big slabs of foam, continuous slabs of foam, and manipulated them by hand to get to a form that we like. Skewer them with threaded rods, and basically spray finish them fix the form in place with a hot spray rubber. Yeah, I mean, each piece is a little bit unique because, they are, the process sort of determines the form, the final form. But yeah, I mean, these chairs that we first made for Chamber Gallery in Buenos Aires, we later made a couple times for Alexander Wang stores in Asia. They really, they're just so simple and so thick and dumb that it really invites interaction. In the Soho store before the pandemic, when these chairs were brought in, we definitely saw children jumping on them and just as if they're a playscape. So sort of that sort of sense of joy comes from being being able to recognize with the form, identify with the finish, the form, the simplicity of it, and engage with them.
You use words like simplicity, but I also want to point out to the audience that MONLING uses, as you said, kind of continuous forms. And if you look closely at any of her couches, they have no seam on it. So just think about how hard that is to do and how hard that is to make. All right, so we've reached the end of our slideshow. I would love to open it up to you guys for some Q&As for these amazing designers we have in front of us. So,
yeah, I'm happy to also bring the microphone.